Hello, everybody. I want to
Hello.
welcome everyone to this edition of the Fire Engineering Building Construction Group. Today, we are going to talk about an event that if the fire service is ever changing, and we're always turning people over, turning members over, careers move on, generations of firefighters come and go. And today we're going to talk about an event that had happened right before I started in my career in the fire service, and it had an impact. And I guess I'm showing my age and my time on the job that unfortunately it's been kind of pushed to the side and forgotten about, and that is what took place in a town in Hackensack, New Jersey, on July 1st, 1988. Um, Today we have two members of the Hackensack Fire Department. One member was on during the event. The other member came on shortly thereafter, and you will have two different perspectives of a fire department that before the event, the line of duty death, and one member that came on after, and the changes and the lessons. And we have our usual members that were been on in the past with us. But before we get to introductions and bios, if you are an older member of the fire service, you remember these VHS tapes that were called American Heat, American Heat tapes. And this was a VHS tape that they would send to firehouses, and you could order them, and they would talk about events before the internet of taking place around the country. And this is just a very small snippet of the report on the Hackensack, New Jersey fire. Let's see here. Hopefully we'll get this up.
Hey, Joe, you're
In the 117-year history of the Hackensack, New Jersey Fire Department, there had never been a firefighter killed in a fire until July 1st, 1988. But between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m., that changed forever. It is just past 3 p.m., and off-duty River Edge, New Jersey firefighter Mike Jurgensen is on the scene of a fire in the rear of Hackensack Ford on River Street. Jurgensen, who always carries a video camera, has heard the call of fire on his car scanner and is approximately 2 minutes away.
The smoke is very acidic. We're on the scene here in Hackensack on River Street, Ford dealership, across from McDonald's. You got a working fire in the attic.
Hackensack Fire Headquarters has dispatched engines 301 and 304, Rescue 308, a one-man unit, and Battalion 1. Jurgensen has positioned himself on the south side of the building. As you face the front of the auto dealership, Jurgensen is on the right, a service area with several bay doors. When first responders arrived at Hackensack Ford, here's what they faced. Hackensack Ford was located on a major north-south roadway. Built in the late 1940s, extensively renovated in 1973, it had 4 sections. A showroom area in front, a parts department, a large service area, and a body shop in the rear. In the rear, the east end of the service area, a so-called tool room measured 18 feet by 20 feet. That room was constructed of concrete block. It had only one door for openings. The rear wall of the room featured a concrete block wall, separating the service area from the body shop. That service area had a wood bowstring roof, again with concrete block walls. There were 5 wooden trusses with a clear span of 78 feet, approximately 16 feet apart. It's very important to note, too, that the attic space had been used for automobile parts storage. Running the entire length of the service and repair areas, it also contained oil, gas, antifreeze, some cleaning fluid, bits and pieces of wood, plastics, and paper, according to Hackensack Ford employees. The ceiling had 2 scuttles, or access holes, one on the east and one on the west. There was no fire detection, alarm system, or automatic sprinklers. The total ground floor area was approximately 18,000 square feet. The attic area above the service area consisted of 7,800 square feet. There was also a small stairway leading up into that part storage area. Workers observed an automobile exhaust removal system hose burning at ceiling level. Although the hose burned off and was extinguished by an employee, the fire had apparently been burning in the attic for several minutes. Employees started evacuating Hackensack Ford. That the fire had a substantial head start seems to be verified by the first call to Hackensack Ford from a woman at a tennis club about a block away who reported seeing flames and smoke. She had called almost 30 seconds before any employees of Hackensack Ford telephoned authorities. In exactly 2 minutes, the first engine has radioed to headquarters. 304 on the scene. We have a heavy smoke condition. It appears to be a working fire. As you watch the tape, we will describe to the best of our knowledge what was taking place. Over the course of the next several minutes, firefighters under the command of Battalion Chief Sandy Williams tried to determine the exact location and extent of the fire.
Put a second to putting a third alarm
The
in now,
officer
Harvey.
from Engine 304, seeking to find the source of the smoke, tried to find access to the attic. It was from there smoke appeared to be coming. The rest of the crew advanced a 1 1/2 inch hand line into the service area. The truck crew made an assessment of conditions on the roof at 1504-54, truck 307 radios, 307 to Battalion 1. You got heavy smoke.
Okay, so shortly thereafter, about 20 minutes in, collapse occurred, and it killed 5 Hackensack firefighters. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, and the building construction and where we are at today and all the changes, and where we are at today is based on a lot of things that took place on that day. So we'll start by introducing 2 members of our panel. We have a few that, 3 members of our panel. We have a few that are missing today, but we'll start with Glenn Corbett. Glenn, if you would introduce yourself and tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I'm in Bergen County where this fire occurred. I was assistant fire chief up in Waldwick, Northwest Bergen County. I'm technical editor of Fire Engineering Magazine, and I'm also the current author of Brannigan's Building Construction text. So this is an important fire for everyone on this call, really for everybody in the fire service, but particularly for the folks on this call. This is something we'll never forget. So thanks, Joe.
All right, Jack Murphy.
Hello, everybody. Jack Murphy. I actually live 2 towns away from Hackensack. I've served in Bergen County since 1979 as a fire marshal, deputy chief, and left as a deputy coordinator in the county. So I'm pretty well versed with this fire, like the other gentleman joining us today.
Okay, and while we're waiting on Paul Dansbach, there's Paul. Paul, can you hear us?
Got you, Chief. Sorry
Okay.
about that.
No problem. Just going through bios and introductions, so it's good timing. Go ahead and introduce yourself to our viewers.
Okay, so Paul Dansbach, I'm the fire marshal in Rutherford, which is Bergen County also. Fire instructor up at Bergen County Fire Academy, and I've been a presenter out at FDIC for a number of years.
Okay. Okay, and like I mentioned earlier, we have 2 members of the Hackensack Fire Department, John Davis and Mike Christensen. John, we're going to go by seniority, so you're up.
That's John.
Thanks, Mike. John Davis. I've been a fireman in Hackensack since 1986, January of 86. I started, come from a firefighting family. It was in my blood. I was a volunteer before I was on there. And it's been a blessing. Absolutely love the fire service. And I love being a fireman in Hackensack.
All right, thank you for doing this. And Chief Mike Christensen, tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, please.
Mike Christensen. I got hired February 1989, February 22nd, 1989. So I'm 6 months after the Ford fire. Right now I'm in charge of training and safety for the department. I also work up at the Fire Academy with Paul. And you know what? My career has been a blessing. You know, this is the best job in the world. And if I could, I'd like to do it all over again.
think all of us concur. We're all the same.
Time goes by too quick.
It does. It does. Okay, so we'll start with John. And we played that tape, but take our viewers back to the Hackensack Fire Department in July of 1988 first, and then we'll get into the building. But how big is Hackensack, New Jersey? How big was the department then? A little bit about your department size and how you ran back then.
It's the county seat of Bergen County. It's an older industrial city. Most of the industrial area has been taken over by residential at this point. About 40,000 people, swells to probably a little over 100 during the day, with all the office and the county buildings. At the time we had 100 guys. Unfortunately today we got 101. So the city has grown and we're trying to keep up. The department has grown tremendously since then. The responsibilities, obviously in the fire service, our responsibilities have grown tremendously. Taking on EMS, I mean, we wear numerous hats that we didn't back then. Back then, we were basically firemen, and today we're a little bit of everything.
What the day of the fire, or at that time, what was so what was the staffing? Now the video showed the initial response, I think, was 2 engines, your battalion, and a truck or a rescue. What was a typical, or what was on duty that day, and what responded in on that first alarm? Total manpower.
Total on duty would have been 18. We ran 4 engines, which was staffed by officer and 2, and the ladder, which was an officer and 2. And the rescue at the time, the rescue was relatively new, and they would run it if we had what they would call an extra guy. So, and it was, it had just started about a year before we started running the rescue, and just to have those tools on the scene. And so we didn't work out the staffing yet, the responsibilities for the rescue. He was just kind of a helper at that point. Whoever you needed help with a line, the truck guys needed a hand. So it wasn't a well-defined position at that point. As today, it's much different today. But yeah, Joe.
So when the call came in, 3 o'clock, Hackensack Ford, it's a typical, all of us have some sort of auto dealership in our jurisdictions, our towns. Did you at the time in Hackensack, did you have any kind of pre-plan or knowledge of the building, or do inspections? How was things set up, for that particular business with Hackensack? I know this is 1988, so we didn't have the type of CAD or pre-planned computer stuff that we have now, but tell our viewers a little bit about what the setup of the building and the initial knowledge base, if you would, about it.
That particular building, at that time, the commercial buildings were inspected by fire prevention. The companies really didn't get out and do too much pre-planning. We had target buildings that were pre-planned, nursing homes, senior housing, things like that. Not a lot of commercial building pre-planning. Some of the larger buildings in town, commercial buildings, we had a rough pre-plan of it, but not like we do today. So at the time, it really didn't stand out, although I was aware it was a bowstring truss, and I'll go back a minute. I come from a firefighting family, so it was in my blood. I was what you would call a buff back in the day. So I was aware of Ridgefield, Wallbaums, that I knew about it. I knew it was a bowstring truss, but that's probably all I knew about the building. We passed it 1,000 times, and there's hundreds of them, and you don't even notice them until something happens, and then they stand out. But there was no real pre-plan for that building itself.
Were you on duty that day, or were you on duty or off? Obviously,
I had left that morning.
Okay.
We have a recall system. At the time, you'd work a 10 and 14. So the middle day you were off, you worked your night, you were off, you were due back that night. You were subject to recall. So if they had any kind of working fire, anything substantial, you would have to come back to work. So you didn't go far. Like most guys worked in the area and you were around.
So again, through the video, you know, you probably had a head start, as what they mentioned. You know, passerby called, or someone other than what was working in there. So here we have this fire back in 1988. What would have been the standard attack? You know, he mentioned the 1.5 inches, but you know what the mindset was, an aggressive mindset. Probably would that be fair to say back then?
Hackensack was a predominantly most of our fires were in residential wood frame houses. So that's how we fought fires, regardless of what kind of building it was in. That's the way you did business. So 1.5 inches was our house fire line. That's what you used. So that was the line. Back then, you didn't use a 2.5 unless the incident commander ordered a 2.5. Today, that would never happen today. You know, obviously we have SOPs today and training, and guys know when to use what. But back in the day, 1.5 inches was the go-to line.
Jack or Glenn, Mike, whoever wants to chime in on this, what, you know, I'll pull up a picture for our viewers, but let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the bowstring truss, and for some of our younger members, if someone wants to give a little input, exactly what it is, where it is predominant, and we'll go from there. So Glenn, again, would you explain to our viewers a little bit about a bowstring truss and the type that was at Hackensack Ford on that day in '88?
Sure. So as John pointed out earlier, you know, we're 3 major fires within about 30 miles of each other. 1967 fire in Cliffside Park, New Jersey, in a bowling alley, utilized this bowstring truss system. Wall bombs in Brooklyn, New York, 1978, used this, again, bowstring truss system. And then, of course, Hackensack, we're talking about today, also used a bowstring truss system. So this is a common structural element in a lot of buildings across the country. These are older buildings. The bowstring truss, of course, the reason why they're utilized is that they can effectively span long distances. The roofs can span long distance without any columns. That's the bottom line. Architects, building owners, they don't like columns because they get in the way of things. So supermarkets, bowling alleys, auto dealerships, these are all places that want wide open spaces. And the bowstring truss played that role for probably close to 100 years. So it's been around a long time. They have, like I said, they sort of have disappeared from new buildings really since probably after World War II, the 50s and 60s. Steel started to make a big, you know, steel became a predominant material, and this sort of went out the window. But here's the issue. These are all over the country. So, you know, why are we concerned about them? Well, we're concerned about them because they do, in fact, span long distances without columns. So if any individual bowstring truss were to fail, you don't just get a small area of collapse, you get a very large area collapse. The video we watched earlier mentioned, I think they were either 16 or 18 feet apart, over 70 feet long. So we lose just one of them, you lose a very large area of the building. These are massive engineered building components. They're basically, you know, play the role of a beam to support, in this case, the roof load above, again, without having the columns underneath. You'll notice that just like any other truss, and if we're not familiar with trusses, we know that they're basically composed of three components, right? You've got what's called the upper chord or top chord, a lower chord, CHORD, and web members inside, basically, right? So the web, or what we in this particular diagram show, diagonal ties and vertical struts. These are all what we call pinned connections. So they're basically larger sections of lumber that are bolted at all these different points across. So again, we say engineered, they are, in fact, they were made in a factory and driven to the construction site and then put up into the building, basically. So these, again, the bottom line issue for us about trusses, of course, is that not only the combustible, of course, the wood trusses are all combustible, but that they, again, the fact that if they fail during a fire, they in fact are, of course, the collapse area is enormous with these, and this is a very heavy roof system here. So that's sort of the baseline of all this. I just one additional point about those three fires. You know, we talk about, I mean, Vinnie Dunn's probably the one who has coined the term, don't trust the truss, right? Well, that's for good reason. It's not just this kind of truss, it's really any kind of truss, because for the most part, we don't have the mass of, you know, a solid piece of wood or a solid piece of steel, basically. These are, again, engineered. But I want to point out about those three fires, that's something that we don't think a lot about. The fire in 1967 in Ridgefield, New Jersey, not too far away from this one, the men that were killed, the majority of them were, as far as I know, Jack can confirm this, were killed on the outside of the building. The wall actually came down and killed the guys in an alleyway. In the case of wall bombs, the members are on the top of the building, basically on top of the truss when it went down. And of course, in Hackensack, the members are essentially underneath the truss. So there's something important point to make here, is that there's these three different fires had firefighters in different positions around these trusses, and in every case, they lost their lives because of that. So again, bowstring truss not being put in new buildings today. There's other kinds of trusses that are out there that probably mimic to some extent the same problems, but this is a technology of yesterday. But remember, they're all out there, and of course, as Jack would point out, the hump shape, the bowstring, like a bow and arrow, that's the classic sort of look at a building and say, gee, it might have a bowstring truss in it. And you know, that's one thing, of course, to note when you're responding to particularly buildings that aren't in your jurisdiction normally, that you show up to something like this. This is something you should remember to back your mind. And I just thought of one last point here. Several years later, there was another fire in a former supermarket in Wyckoff, New Jersey, in a wine and spirit business, basically. And I can guarantee you, because I was there at that fire as well, I can guarantee you the guys that were in Wyckoff thought back to Hackensack. As soon as the word bowstring truss came up, they were well aware of that. That fire had gained some headway. They fought from the outside, and nobody got hurt. But that's a legacy of this. So the members that were killed in all these fires I talked about, that's their memory, right? That's the legacy for these folks, because people learn from that, and you know, we're all the better for it. Unfortunately, they lost their lives in that case, in all those cases. So thank you, Joe.
Yeah. One of the other things, and we'll get this as we move forward before the end, but Jack, if they were to build, Jack Murphy, if they were to build this type of building again, tell our viewers, you know, like Glenn had said, this was a legacy type of construction or building. Chances are they're not going to build this type of building again today, correct?
Well, I would refer that to Glenn. I haven't seen it, but there are new different frames and everything else for roofing and that take replace of this one,
Okay.
basically. So I haven't seen anything new. Glenn, do you?
No, I mean, there's new, of course, wood, you know,
Yeah.
new versions of this,
Right,
not really like this, but
No,
the other
no.
thing is, this is so, you couldn't afford to do this today. I think that's the
Yeah.
thing. I mean,
Okay.
this would be very expensive to actually construct one of these today, because we've got cheaper technology now. Steel, of course, really dominates for these kind of situations and stuff.
Yeah, you'll get the span that you want with lighter weight material.
Yeah, with
You know,
steel particularly.
And the other thing too is that I've gone into some buildings, all right, where from afar I see it as a flat roof. I go inside and this is an upside down truss, just what you're seeing here. So it gives you no indication of the hump outside at all. And I've seen them in hockey rinks and other rinks like that. Have you seen them too, Glenn, or anybody else?
Well, of course, I think we all seen a situation where buildings like this who have the bowstring trusses have incredibly tall parapets along the exterior walls, and you don't know they're there unless you know they're there ahead of time.
Yeah.
You know, it's a surprise. So, I mean, for the listeners today that you roll up to a building which appears to perhaps have a flat roof on it, you go look across the parapet when you get to the top of the ladder and you see this bowstring situation. That's an immediate message to the incident commander of the roof structure there. So definitely.
As we move on to the fire and to the event, whether John or Mike, so we have this working fire. It's in the attic space. 20 minutes in, the battalion chief, Sandy Williams, he calls everybody out of the building. How long after that did this building then collapse? From the time that Williams said, you know what, we need to get out of here.
He ordered everybody out several times.
Okay.
The first 2 times, I don't think it was acknowledged. And then he sent one of his staff officers to verbally get the guys out. They were in the process of moving out when the collapse happened, but I believe it was about 8 or 9 minutes from when he ordered everybody out to the collapse. So they knew it was coming. And we're guilty of this today. You're ordered out and nobody's in a hurry to, nobody wants to give it up. And it's a lesson to keep in mind. When he says out, he means it.
Yeah.
John, didn't you also have limited frequencies when you're trying to operate your radio and then they're trying to tone out the recall?
Yeah. That was another big issue.
Yeah.
Radio traffic was difficult. We operated with one channel, and mutual aid was coming in, and they were tying up that channel. We used a recall system that was an audible alert over the radio, so that tied up the radio. So there was a lot of traffic going on, interfering with the fireground operation.
Yes.
Did only the officers, probably back then, only the officers carried portable radios, correct?
Officer and the rescue, the guy, Steve Ennis, assigned to the rescue, he had a radio also. And if we had an extra radio, the truck chauffeur got one, but that was it.
All right, so I have up here the showroom, the area, and where the firefighters were. So back to a little bit about communications. The collapse occurred, and you have three members that were caught in the collapse in the area here. And then you had 2 other members that were sought refuge in a tool room. So I guess for our viewers here, when the collapse occurred, did the battalion chief know immediately that he had firefighters still in that building and trapped?
It's just going to be my opinion. I would say, yeah, he was standing at the bay door, basically giving verbal commands at that point. So when it came down, it sealed off the bay doors from the back, from the side B of the building. It came down, it sealed off that entrance. So the 2 guys that went into the closet, that was their only refuge. You couldn't get back out the garage door at that point because the ceiling was 3 to 4 inches thick. And when it came down, it was relatively intact when it came down, and it sealed off their exit. So the three members that died immediately died in the collapse. And the Lieutenant Reinhagen and firefighter Ennis sought refuge and they found themselves in a closet.
When, one other thing, and I want to bring Glenn back in on this. Is it common in my town? We have some of these older buildings with these bows, and you can walk from, so if we were to say this particular building again, you're able to walk in the attic space between these trusses.
Yeah.
Is that, explain to our viewers, if they go into a building like this and they see that, is that very common? Is that a common feature, these older legacy bowstrings? And because here at Hackensack, and again, in some buildings that I have in my town, there's storage. You can walk through storage. It leads to weight. But how prevalent with these buildings that are standing in our towns across the US, is that a feature?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch out there, and I mean that's an important point of when you're dealing with a bowstring truss. You know, it's two. I would say it's two different fires, but it's two different situations where if there was no ceiling system in here, right? If these are all exposed, a couple things. One is you can see what's going on, which didn't happen here because you couldn't see from the floor level. And the other thing too is that you can see what's happening, but you also have the ability to put water right on the fire, right on the truss that's burning. So in this situation, everything was stacked against them, and this is a problem for these kind of buildings. And in this particular case, yeah, with a ceiling system, it's one thing, but this also had, we understand, divisions between essentially at each truss itself, right? So they put some type of barrier around each one, so you could not, if you were standing at one end of the building where the scuttle is there and looking to the other, you know, you couldn't see all the way straight through. And that is a real big danger for firefighters, right? We all understand that because you can't see what's happening. The firefighters that understood the most about what was going on with the guys on the roof here, not the guys down below. You saw the video earlier. I mean, you could see through the building in that one video with the guys up on the scuttle ladder going up into it. Right. So this is the real danger of this kind of roof system, is that there's enormous, you know, issues of, you know, the fire load of the trusses, plus all the storage, in this case, the materials up there, and being hidden from view. I mean, every single, you know, checkbox here in terms of danger was checked off. So this was really a really dangerous situation. But yeah, but they're around. They're around.
And it's in some of these lightweight two-pit construction commercial buildings. All right, I've gone in and seen the storage of the product there. They don't have it. It's exactly see the whole thing. So I'm dealing with a wood shop and everything, and they're supplying all their wood in between the wooden trusses. So again, you know, it's still prevalent, not as prevalent, but firefighters going in there have to point that out to the fire inspectors and to the companies. And at that point, tell them they got to take the product off the ceiling, the roof level.
Right. It was never designed for that, of course.
Right.
I mean, just besides just the danger of storing the material in there, there's the whole issue of the weight of that material, right? Yes. And none of that stuff was reviewed by the building department or anybody. And that's going on, I'm sure, in other buildings across this country, right? Guys are storing that stuff there. So the fire prevention people, if you're not doing company inspection, the fire prevention people have to be really focused on something like this. And they find, again, a truss loft ceiling system. That is something that they got to really throw the flags up and find out what's going on. And that might require going back to the building department and say, look, and tell them they got to get all that stuff out of there until you're assured that it's being done in a safe manner. So exactly. Paul might have something to say. I think Paul's back.
Yeah, I'm back. I don't know if I'm on.
Oh yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I lost my computer, so I'm on the phone now. So, you know, after the Hackensack Ford fire, there was a lot of attention paid to.
We lost Paul again.
And inventory trusses, and you know, truss placard requirements became municipal ordinance. Eventually worked its way into the fire code. But I think, you know, the point that you made, it was very, very common to have these truss lofts loaded with storage. You know, as Glenn mentioned, it's really not designed for that. So what occurred in the Hackensack Ford fire was certainly not an unusual condition. that condition exists, in any number of places. It's a huge, no building is ever constructed with enough storage space. And the way these heavy timbered, especially the bowstring trusses are constructed, you get a story in most areas of that truss loft. And they put a floor in. The bottom core of the truss is not designed to have that load delivered at right angle to the bottom cord. So, add some deterioration because of leaks in the roof over years. It's just a bad combination of things that occur with this type of construction, these occupancy types.
Back to the fire. So we John or Mike, we have three members that have they're caught in a collapse, and then you have Stephen Ennis and Richard Reinhagen are in this closet. We mentioned briefly about the communications issues. How much contact or how long were they able to at least try to get some contact with the battalion chief or outside world, if you will, until they both ran out of air?
Is that Mike?
Well, I was going to say their radio transmissions actually were picked up on a scanner. And back in '88, if you had a scanner, you had to have crystals, instead of just programming a scanner the way we do today. I don't know if it was somebody watching the fire or somebody just across the river, maybe in Pagoda, Richfield Park. They actually heard them calling their maydays on a portable scanner, on a small scanner. So that's how their transmission were coming across.
So I want to move. How long was it before the members were recovered? How long on scene did it take to get those members out of that building?
Back then, like everything else, it changed in the fire service for the better, I like to think. Back then, we didn't have riding lists. You didn't have a par at a fire. When you switch gears, you didn't do a par. So who was where was still taking place during the recovery process. We weren't even sure, as we were recovering them, how many we were looking for. It's just the way things were done back then. Things were ragtag loose. And obviously today that would never take place. We have riding lists and much more control of where our people are and who's where and who you're riding with. But we knew there were people missing. We didn't know how many. We didn't find the guys towards the north wall till later on. And then we started coming across them. We knew Reinhagen was missing. He called for about 10 minutes or so. And we knew he actually said he was with Steve Ennis. So we knew there were two guys in a closet. We were familiar with the rear of the building. And again, there was no fast teams back then. It was just put together in the heat of the moment. And we had started a rescue operation, and probably the same thing we would do today. Very similar operation. And we started to breach. We figured about where they were. Like I said before, you couldn't get in from the south side because it was that heavy plaster and concrete board. And so we went around through the auto body shop, and with the help of some of the employees there, they steered us to about where they thought this closet was, and we started a breach there. But obviously, the amount of time it takes to breach a wall like that, we were up against the clock at that point.
So moving after this event, so Chief Christensen, you came on, you said in 1989, correct?
9.
When you came on, Chief, what was the overall, did you come on by yourself or with with other members? And if so, what was the, What was the atmosphere like in the department? How are things for you as a new rookie coming in so shortly after this tragedy?
So, well, one, I remember when I came in for my interview, I remember Chief Alias asking me if I knew about the fire, if I knew what happened at the fire, which obviously I did. I knew some people already on the fire department. I have a brother-in-law that was on the job at that time. So I knew people here, and roughly maybe I was working a half a mile down the road at a Lincoln Mercury dealer during this fire. So my first day on the job, February 22nd, 89. I remember the 3rd Platoon was on duty. I'm coming in the door, green, no experience whatsoever. People had told me what to be prepared for, but coming in the door green, I was already nervous, just the fact coming into a new job, you know. Finally got the call. I was only called the Friday before and told to be here on a Wednesday. That's how much notice I had. Obviously, I made the right decision. I walked out the door at the Lincoln Mercury dealer. But there was still, I guess you would say, there was still recovery going on. You know, everybody was still healing from it. And, knowing that, I was still very nervous being in here because I guess I felt like a little bit of an outsider at that point because I wasn't at that fire. And, came on that day by myself. So it wasn't like I came in with a group of people. And there were maybe 2 or 3 guys hired just before me. Actually, no, maybe 8 hired after the fire before me. And they were already somewhat established here. They knew people already. They knew everybody's names. So it was a little bit more comfortable for them. And, like I said, coming in, I just wanted to make sure I did the right thing coming in. So it took a while to, establish.
John, tell our viewers a little bit about the bosses that day, if you would, the battalion chief and then the fire chief. And do you remember any kind of, back then there was a report done from the NFPA, but or even Mike was on probably when they were doing some investigations, but how were they after the fact that for this, and then the report part when everything came out and maybe some of the I don't want to say the mistakes, but errors or practices that could be improved on, how they were accepted in the Hackensack Fire Department and those chiefs?
I think initially, through the shock of it, we spoke earlier, Chief Elias had done an interview with the press, and he was on his heels at that point. He's trying to defend his department, which he was very proud of. And he said he would do everything the same way that he did that day. He would do it all over again. And I think that was a point where everybody realized, hey, listen, something needs to change here. I mean, obviously there were mistakes, and you have to learn from these mistakes. And most of the chief officers realized, and I'm not going to say it was a process, it was a process. A lot of, especially the older guys were military guys, and they stuck to the program, and you forced your program, your traditions and your procedures. This is the way we do it. And Mike will tell you, this is the way we do it because that's the way we've always done it. It's the Hackensack way. Well, and we saw where that brought us. So after that, things opened up, and many of the officers in particular were much more receptive to doing things differently. You start to look at how you personally do your job, how the department procedures, and just your approach to things. And I think everybody did a little self-analysis, and the job is way better for it. We've come a long way because guys were willing to realize, hey, listen, we got to do things different. And you know what? There was some stinging criticism from people afterwards, not entirely unwarranted. I mean, somebody's got to say it. You know, maybe you don't like the way they say it, or you didn't like to hear it at the moment, but things needed to change. And I know Paul was instrumental in, you know, making things better for us. You know, bringing a outside influence in to the department. You know, he was in there training, guys were familiar with them. So he brought in some programs and some training, and you got to tiptoe, you know, it's raw. And he'll tell you, it was tough for a while training.
One thing real quick, I wanted to ask, you know, because again, the theme of this in our series is building construction. And even today, you know, I say it all the time, we do so many things in the fire service that, you know, we're so busy that young firefighters, they get 3 hours in the academy and then they come on the job, and you either have a passion for building construction or it's, you know, you don't. And that's unfortunate. You know, I think some people think of it as, well, I like ropes, so I'll be really into technical rescue and ropes then. Or, you know, that person's really into building construction. Now, building construction has to be accepted and understood and learned by every firefighter that goes out the door or says they're a firefighter. When you came on, how would you say that, you know, the amount of knowledge, now you said you were on the job or you were into the job, so you were aware of the service, fire service, and, you know, a little bit more than others, but what would you say the knowledge base of building construction was when you came on with the officers, whether it was your command officers, company officers? How was their knowledge base of building construction? And maybe even Glenn could answer, like, back then, what was, you know, where did you go? What did you do to understand building construction?
You know, most of the building construction information we got was from guys that work construction, the guys that were, you know, out doing roofs and doing construction every day. And you kind of depended on those guys because the textbooks we read in the firehouse, you were reading to get promoted.
Yeah.
Okay. You were reading this book to get promoted, and you're trying to regurgitate the information onto a test and get promoted. That's changed. We read the book now to learn it, to save lives, to protect ourselves.
Chief Christensen, when you came on and after this event, then how, so, you know, the books were, you know, the study materials were there for building construction, and that's when you learn for the test, but was then building construction pushed more in your department in Hackensack after the fact, or was it gradual?
Well, going through the academy, it may have only been, I think there was only 30 lessons for Fire 1 in 89, roughly. I know today it's up to 50 something lessons, and probably still isn't enough building construction in the Fire 1 program. But I can remember, I know Paul was in here giving building construction classes and refreshers, you know, back when I came on. Actually, I got Paul scheduled for 4 days coming up in July for a lightweight refresher. So it was maybe gradual, but like John said, and you know what, 100%, he's right on target, was building construction back then. Everybody was working on their days off. You know, I don't think there was anybody that got off duty and went home. Everybody went to work. So that's how a lot of building construction knowledge came around. But yeah, and then we started working on classes between building construction, incident command classes, changing the atmosphere in the firehouse was very big, you know, and education for everybody back then.
One of the things that this fire brought to the forefront, or one of the, you know, the changes in the fire service, and it's still not there, is the placarding, what we call truss placarding, or, you know, basically identifying that the building has a truss roof or floor system. Would any of you guys, Paul, Glenn, or Jack, you know, how did it come to be? Obviously, Hackensack was the push, but where are we at today with that, because there's probably some firefighters that are watching this that have never seen or heard about this placarding system. Where are we at today with this?
I can comment.
Go ahead, Paul.
I can comment a little bit about New Jersey, at least, and how it evolved. Hackensack, to the best of my recollection, was the first municipality city to enact a local ordinance, and that ordinance kind of spread around Bergen County and eventually worked its way into the state fire code. And it remains in New Jersey fire code today. And I'll let Jack talk a little bit more about that subject.
Yeah, after this incident and everything, several firefighters got together, and one of the lead person was retired chief out of Teaneck, Bill Hillemeyer. Bill Hillemeyer was talking, I guess, the guys from Hackensack, and they come up with this placarding system, and that's what you see here. That yellow placard there. F was for floor, R was for roof. A very simple thing that we put together. Bill asked me to come to Trenton and testify for them because we had some experience in my mutual aid with the Cliffside Park fire. And with that, they put together legislation for the state, but you know how enactments go. So Hackensack ran with theirs. I took it back to my mutual aid group. We had 8 towns at the time, and we sat down with every mayor and we asked them to push it through. And ours got through, I know, in 1990, and I see here the state finally got through in 92. But that was for years only in New Jersey. And again, you put things out there, you put publications out and everything else, hoping people pick it up. And you see here, like, it wasn't until New York State in 2002, they finally picked it up. Is this prevalent today? A little bit, yes. Have things changed drastically in the way of construction? Most definitely. I was telling Paul before, cold formed steel, OS&B, sawdust and glue, I-beams and things of that nature. And I'm seeing, when I was in London 2 years ago, I-beams, steel I-beams with holes in them to run the ductwork through for the HVAC and everything else. So it's manifested. All right, the placarding is a good thing. Ours was to the left of the door, 6 feet up. All right, I see now what Hackensack did. I call it one-stop shopping. You have the FDC connection. Above the FDC connection, you have the new placard. You have a red light over there so that you can see that at night. So the thing is that you hit on before is what I call pre-planning intelligence. How do I get this out there quicker? We have these computer systems and everything. We're not pushing enough data out there for initial operations on this stuff. So it had a life, all right, and it's still there, but there are other things that are coming along that we're not keeping up with.
Glenn, did the Truss, one of the things, if I remember correctly, did the Truss manufacturers or, the big money, the builders or the building industry, did they push back on that Truss placarding?
I think, I know they did. I think some of the opposition came from the building owners, actually, because, and it was extended actually, the placard, the sort of came out of Hackensack's, situation stuff that has evolved over time in New Jersey. Now, Paul and I are on the code council, fire code council, and there's all sorts of things about, now information about solar panels and different types of trusses, lightweight versus steel. I mean, so it's sort of evolved over time to be an informational, again, a piece of information for firefighters. And most importantly for us, the fact a lot of guys are doing electronic pre-plans or and they're familiar with their own community. But the thing is, all of us do so much mutual aid now that we go to buildings in towns that we normally don't go to. And that's really where it's really important to have that, have that sign it for us, because that lets the guys, it's a uniform sign. It's Jack mentions now it's been in state fire code for years, so there's somewhat a uniformity to it across New Jersey now too. Yeah. So it's important. Yeah.
And didn't some local communities, a local ordinance and everything, pass it for new construction for 1 or 2 family homes?
Yeah, that was one of the funny ones. That was one of the situations where we got pushback because there was a point at one town was going to actually have one of these placards in every single family home with lightweight wood trusses. So you can imagine what they heard about that, and it was arguments over which should be on every building or at least an entry to the complex or whatever. But it's certainly something that, we're talking about bowstring trusses here, but as we mentioned at the beginning of the program, that's why Vinny Dunn has said, don't trust the truss. It's it implies long spans without columns, basically wide failure areas, in essence. So that's important. Hey, Joe, since just throw a couple of things at you here. So I teach a class called the 25 Most Significant Fires in American History, and Hackensack is in there. And we've alluded to a few of the issues here, but Hackensack has changed the American fire service for a lot of reasons, right? I mean, we've been focusing on the building construction here, but we mentioned about the radio issue, right? So, the fact that there's fewer and fewer communities that are sharing dispatch and operations channels on a single frequency, that's eventually going away. It still has happened. It still happens today. But, Chesapeake, Virginia was another good example. The same exact thing happened where the radios got overwhelmed and messages weren't getting through. So that's a big one. The fact that we have PAR and we've got RIT or FAST teams today, and the fact of past devices, all these things that can be pointed right back at Hackensack because they're all relevant to that. So this fire has, the legacy, again, in my mind, we're going to perhaps see in a moment here the wonderful memorial that they've built in Hackensack for the 5 firefighters who were killed. But, another memorial to them is the fact that other firefighters aren't subjected to the same problems with the same technology and things and the same procedural issues, right? So we've got a much better situation for us nationally. And just yesterday, some of you may be aware of this, I wasn't, that LA, for example, LA City is equipping I guess for the last year now, they've been equipping every firefighter with their own thermal imaging camera. And you would have thought after Worcester, right, in the late 90s, you would have thought that the NFPA would have come out and said, you know what? Every firefighter has to have a helmet, gloves, everything else, SCBA, a camera, right? To just simply be able to get out of a building base. Imagine if that was a requirement. But like I said, Worcester was the next major fire where these issues came up, right? So it's Hackensack in 88, and then of course 99 in Worcester. So like I said, this fire is well beyond just the issues of bowstring construction. This affected a lot of things that go on to every day, and we owe it to the memory of these 5 firefighters for that happening. Actually, that if because of the loss of those guys, that the American firefighters across the country have a lot better technology and also better procedures now than they did back in the 70s and 80s. So something to think about.
As we wrap things up, I want to ask Mike and John, how, so now we're getting firefighters that weren't even born in 1988. And one of the things that really, it's a cause for me, I just get all worked up about it, is that we have all these new firefighters, young firefighters, and we need to find a better way to pass on the past and to show them these events, and to get them to understand these events and their lessons. What's a 25-year-old kid or a 22-year-old kid coming on in Hackensack? How are they educated? They go past the memorial, but is it just okay? It's a memorial. How deep do they get into understanding and knowing and the importance of these sacrifices and what they have today because of that?
So when you come to the firehouse, the one thing is that, whether it's on a patch or a decal or on the board inside, there's a saying, never forget. Okay, so after July 1st, that saying, doesn't get erased from this place. And you don't want that tragedy. You want, don't let their deaths go without something positive coming out of it. So again, so you have the trust placards and, accountability system and everything. We've worked hard here to, try to make things better. And so just Thursday, we had 4 new hires start. They're in the academy now already, but part of their orientation, we take them to the memorial, and we don't just drive past. We walk up to the memorial. They look at each granite column. They look at the names, and then we'll bring them back to the firehouse. And John did this for me last year when we hired two about a year ago. Sat them down and went over the fire with them, and pretty much everything we're doing here right now, talking about the fire and what happened, and the building construction and everything. We go over everything with them. We go over the report that came out of the fire, because there's less and less people on the job today that were at that fire, and there's going to be a day where the department has, the total manpower. There'll be nobody that was at that fire, but what has to be instilled into them is that you can never forget that fire. And every year, July 1st, we have a service at Memorial Park, 20-minute service, just to remember, all the fallen firefighters. Like I said, it's not made mandatory, but unofficially, I guess you could say it's mandatory that everybody attended. And we do this every year. So that's part of their orientation, to continue on the tradition that started 33 years ago.
As we close out, and I will mention the members' names before that passed away, but before we do that, some final thoughts. We'll go across the screen here for our listeners that, again, we have many different types of ranks and years on that will be watching this. Final thoughts on what you would want to say. John, I'll start with you. John Davis, go ahead.
One thing we pound into the newer guys, the recruits, you got to keep your head in the game 24/7. We all show up, we're having lazy days, or you want to relax a little bit, and you just got to keep your head in the game. You got to stay focused, big picture, and pay attention to what's going on outside of where you work. Other cities, every line of duty death needs to be studied. How does it affect us? What are we doing that's similar to that? How did that happen? The Swiss cheese model. Okay? And it happens everywhere. You let the little things go and it becomes a big thing, and you can't overcome a big problem. And that's kind of what we push. And I think with Mike's program, training these guys, I think we're successful. And when one of our guys wears a Hackensack uniform and attends a funeral, I want him to have the answers when people ask, hey, what's going on? How'd it go? What happened here? And they need to represent. So, and I thank you guys for keeping this. This is huge in getting it out there, because there are going to be guys that see this that didn't realize. All right. And this needs to keep going.
Thank you. Glenn, final thoughts on what we talked about today, or any advice moving forward based on this?
No, I appreciate what Joe, Joe, I appreciate Joe having us on here today. This is something that, as John pointed out, I just got to stay in the game. That's really what it is. And, it's one of the reasons why, that we have to teach, in my opinion, we have to teach fire service history for this reason, because, we want to learn what happened in the past and learn and apply those lessons to the future. Right. So, and I guess the other the takeaway for us today is that even though, we talk a lot about the new problems they're cropping up now, we can't forget about the old ones, right? That there are buildings out there like the Hackensack Ford dealership that still exists today. So it's really, as we say, the fire service deals with buildings from cradle to grave, and we've got to know as much as we can about them and how they're going to affect us. So again, thanks, Joe, for having us on today.
Thanks. Jack.
Yes, Joe, and thanks for this, guys. I like to say one thing. Hackensack is still being progressive on things. I like to yield my time and let Mike come back in again. And Joe, would you show the Hackensack placard? And, we saw that, but we didn't get into that a little bit more. They've gone beyond just saying it's a floor or a roof. they've also added in things about sprinklers and that. So I'll give it back to Mike. Thank you, guys.
You're talking this one, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. So the F and the slash and the R stands for, F is if you have a truss floor. The R is if you have a truss roof. And then I'm gonna guess here, and somebody help me, obviously, that it's sprinklered, correct? The S is for sprinkler?
Yes, and depending on the building, following the S, it'll tell you if it's fully sprinkled, garage area, common areas, or basement. And, you know, when we're pulling up to a scene, you know, first company on scene giving their size up, but, you know, we teach all the new guys also, and everybody across the board, you know, don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to, you know, ask a question. So, you know, people going into the building, they see the truss placard, they get on the radio and they let command know we got the truss placard identified. So everybody hears it on the radio, and, you know, even if we're going into the same building 100 times and, you know, yeah, everybody knows it, we still say it on the radio that we got that truss placard identified, that everybody knows.
Paul, any final thoughts?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts, Chief. I just want to jump back to what John started to talk about, training, the way things evolved in Hackensack FD. I started teaching at Bergen County in '83. So I was a couple of years in up there. And after the fire, I was given the assignment to go to Hackensack FD and present the wood and ordinary construction class that was developed and distributed by NFA. And at first I had some hesitation, honestly. But the way I was treated there and the way the members, and I'll say this for what it is, the way the younger members and the newer officers wanted information was just amazing. And I think that still exists today. I've always been welcomed there. It's a great, you can see how the culture of their fire department has changed as a result of the Hackensack Ford fire. It remains a very, very positive culture today. And, you know, as Mike mentioned, I'm going there next month, and it's really like almost a third home to me, I guess, being always welcome there. It's a great group. When we first discussed this project and this fire, immediately both John and Mike popped into my head. I don't think that there are two members of the HFD more suited to participate in this today. And I do want to thank them for being here and discussing the fire. And you know, we're gonna keep this the memory of this fire and the memory of those firefighters alive. Just want to end with John Davis never has a lazy day. Okay, that just doesn't exist out there.
Chief Christensen, anything, any final thoughts?
I guess the one thing I would say, and you know what, tell the new firefighters, don't ever let a day go by that you don't want to know. What we have today with the internet, where we can find out so much information, it makes it so much easier to find things out across the country, across the globe. So, you know, again, you know, try to find something every day to just enhance your knowledge base. There's so much to keep up on that, you know what? The day you stop training or the day you stop learning, I'm sure everybody has said the same thing. That's probably the day that you need to get out of the fire service. And I just want to say thank you to everybody. Paul, thank you for the comments, but thank you to Jack, Glenn, Joe, John, for having me here on this board. It means a lot to me. Thank you very much.
And for my final thoughts, I'm going to just say the members that passed away that day, so many years ago, coming up when this airs, it'll be 33 years. But William Kresja, Leonard Radumski, Stephen Ennis, Richard Reinhagen, and Richard Williams were the members that passed away that day. And I also think of not only them, obviously they're first and foremost, but the battalion chief, I really in my own study, Sandy Williams, I sit back and a lot of times when I think about how I have to improve as an IC, I think of what he went through. He was just doing his job as an IC and doing things the way he knew and what he was raised on. And, I also think of the ICs that are involved in these, but this was a big event in my career. And I want to share it, the lessons that it helped me become a better firefighter. And I hope it helps everybody watching this moving forward. So I want to thank everybody. And one last thing is that if you're going to go out and look at your buildings, if you're, get into your buildings, look at your older legacy buildings and ask questions and research and look. Because one other thing is, as these buildings get older, those bowstrings get covered up. And they get covered up by things called rain roofs, which will probably, maybe be another day, another discussion. But, as these age, these roofs, they can be hidden. And that's when we can have these tragedies pop up. So with that, I want to thank everybody. Be safe and get out there and look at your buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.